Thank you everybody for coming for our Guesty Goes virtual online meetup, how to navigate COVID-19. We usually like to do those live in the different cities where we have a lot of our customers and prospects, and we definitely love to usually do our meetups about happier subject than how to navigate COVID-19. But since we're all spending some time in our respective homes, we thought it would be a great time to bring the industry together to really talk about something that is top of mind for all of us, maybe share some best practices, and mainly share with you a lot of data that we are seeing. The situation is changing every day, and so is the data that we're collecting. But we brought together a lot of data experts and industry veterans here on the line to basically talk with us about what we're seeing in different regions of the world, what we're seeing in different parts of the market, and maybe share some of the best practices around handling the COVID-19 situation. A few notes, and then we can get going. So first of all, this is me. My name is Omer. I'm the managing director in the Americas for Guesty, and I'm also managing our global strategy group. And I'm very happy to be here today, coming in from a Guesty background, but actually from upstate New York. Before we go there, a few reminders for everybody on the line. Be sure to grant all the necessary audio permissions so you can actually hear us when we talk. Remember that we cannot hear you. You cannot just unmute yourself and talk. What you can do is actually submit a lot of questions to us or raise your hand, and we'll go over that in just a moment. We will collect all the questions. We'll address some of the questions to all the different panelists throughout the conversation, and we're going to leave some time at the end to make sure that we actually dedicate that time solely to your questions from the audience. We are recording the event, and we are going to share it via email, so all of you can come back, listen to that, and maybe even come back to that in a few months and see if we are right with our predictions here today. We encourage all of you to submit questions throughout the panel. To do that, please click on the question and answers box, type your question and submit. The Guesty marketing team, Abby from our Tel Aviv office, and myself will be monitoring it and address those questions as we go. So we can get going, and it's with great pleasure I want to introduce my three colleagues who are on the line here today. First of all, coming from Barcelona, I believe, Pierre Becerril, who's the CEO and founder of Transparent. Pierre, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Madrid, actually.
Madrid,
but not far away.
Yeah,
no worries.
I'm pretty certain about this one. We have Quinn Huberts, who's the product manager of Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Omer. Hello, everyone.
And of course, they will all introduce themselves and what their companies are doing and what is the data that they're sharing with us today. Last but not least, I believe also from the Bay Area, Alex Nigg, who's the CEO and founder of Properly. Hey, Alex.
Hi, Omer. Thanks very much for having us.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do now. The first 10 minutes, really doing some quick introductory remarks. It's going to take a lot less than that, I suspect. Next, we're going to have 30 minutes of discussion led by Transparent, Wheelhouse, and Properly, bringing us different viewpoints about what's happening in the market, what we've seen in the last few weeks, what are the most successful or recommended approaches, and some interesting tips and best practices. And lastly, we're going to leave at least 20 minutes for question and answers that I will have the pleasure of moderating. Before we get started, a little bit about Guesty. This is not just a Guesty event. This is mainly an industry event, but just for those of you who wondering what we do and why we facilitate this conversation, we are the leading platform for end-to-end solution of complex operational needs for short-term rental management. So we serve thousands of property managers and professional hosts in 80 different countries through 11 different global offices, really helping them manage everything that has to do with running end-to-end their operations, which of course is highly impacted by COVID-19. And so it is our pleasure to try and bring all the voices here and inform everybody in the industry about what is going on. Our platform is also a one-stop shop that really brings together a lot of different players. We build a lot of products in-house to make sure that our customers can really leverage and optimize the management of their vacation rentals and short-term rentals, and really focus on what matters, the guest experience and the asset acquisition, while we do all the rest. And we also collaborate with the best companies in the industry so that our customers can actually use best of breed and the best solutions out there for everything they need. including the 3 companies that we have on the line today that are very dear Guesty marketplace partners. And with that, a little bit about what we're going to talk today. So there are 4 elements that we wanted to cover today in this discussion to make sure that if you leave this discussion today, you're able to basically have some insight about each one of the 4. First one is about mitigating the impact. What are the things that you need to do today, immediately? You probably should have done that before, but you can take some action today to mitigate the immediate impact of this situation. How can you make sure that you are staying informed? What are the different solutions out there that can really allow you to get all the data that you need as the situation evolves? How to price appropriately? And that's a question that we hear time and time again. Do I want to actually reduce the price drastically so that people will still consider going out and travel? Or because travel is so reduced, do I want to actually keep my price high so those that have to travel, those unique cases, are paying me as much as they can, and I can somehow recoup some of my losses in this time? And how do I address traveler concerns and handle everything that has to do around guest experience in such unique times? What are the best ways to approach that? So we move to the actual discussion and make sure that I pass the ball to our first presenter, which is Pierre from Transparent from Madrid. So Pierre, let's start with a little bit of the data that you can share with us as one of the most interesting players out there, collecting a lot of data from the industry and sharing some insights. Very interesting to see what you guys are seeing in the different continents, Asia versus Europe versus the US, and what are the different things that you guys are noticing?
Thanks, Omer. Thanks for the introduction. Maybe I'd say a couple of words about our company just to give context. We created this company Transparent around 4 years ago to help property managers around the world take informed decision. So what it means is that we've created a platform where they can analyze their competitors, their supply, the demand rates, everything they need to take decision is basically in one place. It's like a big Google Analytics, but only for short-term rentals. So that's who we are. And obviously, while we do that, we see data at very high level. So today, what I want to present you is some of this high-level data we've aggregated so we understand trends globally and how this is all impacting us. Great. So, what we've done, and today I'm going to not share a presentation, but I'm actually going to share a website. Maybe I'll paste it in the chat after. Basically, it's on our website, ctransparent.com. You're going to have a pop-up that leads you to this page where we're trying to gather all the information we think is relevant for generally the public, understand what is going on and how this is impacting our industry. We're based in Madrid, one of the most affected cities. So we know firsthand how the situation is. And, we've seen that across all of our clients and, in our own business as well, we're suffering it. So we can feel everyone's pain because we're living it firsthand. And what we mean is, this is a health crisis, but this is also economic crisis coming in. We are on the front line on that one. We're the first one to be impacted. And this is where we hope we'll see the data, potentially shift, as we hope that we're also going to be the first one to get out of it. So basically, in this page, we just have a timeline of events, so you can see how many cases globally and some general events. But one of the things we've decided to put in here is the view of the stock market. There is not a lot of companies in travel that are listed directly on short-term rental. Actually, there is none, but there are the OTAs that we work with on a daily basis are actually some of them listed on the stock market. Airbnb is not yet. There was the plan to go soon, but basically we can still look at Expedia, Booking.com, TripAdvisor. So what the market tells us, and I think that's interesting, is see how much this company has lost in value. So at some point, Expedia lost close to 60% of its value. As of March 13th, basically this company that live off our reservation and our commission have lost 40 billion in market capitalization. So it's a huge amount of value that has been destroyed, and that's about how much the market is expecting our industry to be discounted. So it's a good sign and a good way to measure basically how the general, if you want, industry and the general markets are seeing the travel space. So we'll continue updating that because we think it's important. So in comparison, the Nasdaq decreased by a lot less than that. So again, we're really in the front line. And then we've done an exercise here trying to analyze the global demand, right? So what we've done is we've taken more of our data globally. We track 34 million listings. We've looked at how the occupancy looked like last year. So this is going to be the blue line. And then we look like in the green line, how the occupancy looked like this year. So you can browse over this chart. We're going to refresh it. And the dotted line here is because when we did that, obviously these are reservations for the future that have not really happened yet. So this is what is on the book so far of reservation. So you can see really like the delta coming up in February. So if you look globally, you know, the market was down by a little bit in January compared last year in terms of occupancy. In February, we lost 4% occupancy. It was 4% less demand, if you want. And in March, when we did this analysis, which was really the first week of March, we were already down 23%. You know, we're refreshing that now, and I tell you, it's looking even worse. And if you look at the country analysis, right, what you can see is that China has been progressively hit really hard. And now in March, they were down 60% of the beginning of the month. And again, that doesn't take into account some no-shows and some cancellations that occur after. So you can imagine, you know, this pattern we've seen in China is probably going to come to our markets. We've seen it in Europe. You know, Italy was already pretty bad at the beginning of the month, and it's going to continue coming, right? So it's just, we can't predict the future, right? But we can actually prepare ourselves, you know, for what's to come. And, you know, the worst you can do in crisis situation is do nothing. So for sure, this is a one incentive to take reaction sooner than later. So another thing that, you know, obviously we see in the market is a lot of cancellations. So in this chart, what we've made is basically an analysis of the amount of calendars that are put back into the market. So a lot of that is cancellations. A little bit of that is also new inventory, but most of it is cancellations. And a ratio on how much of it is taken out of the market. So, you know, in a normal month, basically you'd see the normal percentage here, you know, 25% of inventory is taken back in versus taken out. Well, what you see here is by how much, I'm just going to move this cameras here, sorry. But you see by how much, you know, this has been growing in Europe and in the Middle East. Basically, the ratio of how much inventory has been canceled has been massive. So we're back at, let me see here, 143% in Europe. And that was last week. So we refreshed these numbers, I think, and now you can see that the US is actually much higher. So at the beginning, you know, the US were following a similar trend as Europe. Let me go back here. You could see that slowly we were, the US is the blue line here, the light blue one, was doing a parallel path as the European one. And just last week, you know, as it started to hit really hard, it has actually been shifted, and it's actually worse than some of the European markets. So obviously it's not always the same. It's not, you know, all over the place the same. If you look at by type of market, you know, it affects more the urban markets, but the leisure markets are also going there. The main reason is that, you know, in this sample here, we have markets like Florida that have just been basically canceled for the next weeks, and basically that is what is impacting so hard this ratio of cancellation. So a lot of cancellations in the market, and that's what we can see here, right? So I saw there were one of the questions in the Q&A already about cancellations. What we think is that's going to have an impact in general on our industry. There's going to be a before and an after, and this is the picture of the before. Right now, you know, this is how we estimate basically globally the amount of Airbnbs that are flexible versus moderate or strict. Okay, so this was the before, but obviously now in time of great uncertainty, travelers will be looking to get more flexibility, as, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in 2 months. Are we going to be able to travel everything? So we've taken that snapshot. We're going to refresh that to see if people, you know, are adapting and offering more flexible rate. And we know there's been a lot of controversy on the different cancellation policy, but most likely what we're going to have to do as an industry is offer more flexibility to travelers if we want to get back these bookings on the short term. So that's a point on cancellation. We made a point as well on supply. You know, I think this is interesting. You know, we come from a period where our industry has grown tremendously fast in terms of inventory. You know, even the United States, which is a very mature market, has grown 10% year on year from February in last year to this February. So there's more supply on the bigger OTAs. And that's what we see here in the data. So we've taken that snapshot in February. We'll be looking at to take it again in March to see if some of this inventory has been taken out. Because obviously, you know, it's not crazy to believe that a lot of people will be put under a lot of stress with very low occupancy and probably will look for alternatives. So I have an anecdote here, for instance, here in Spain, or where I'm based, I've seen on the long-term rental platforms, if you want the Zillow of Spain, it's called Idealista, a lot more inventory coming back in the market of long term. And it is, believed that a lot of that is actually midterm rental that are trying to be rented because, owners have got their mortgage to pay on that, basically. So for now, it hasn't impacted the supply, but definitely, we expect it will. And if you look at the top countries by how much properties they have, basically, these are the countries that in the next few weeks will be the most affected ones. So the biggest countries for short-term rental are most likely to be also the most affected ones. So we are to expect some change in how much properties are out there, right? Because right now, obviously, there's this extra supply and this extra growth, and obviously much less demand. We'll see how this is going to change. So we've got a few other resources I'm not going to walk over, but we'll load this webinar in here. We've got a couple webinars here also coming. We'll load all this content in here, but we're also going to continue doing some initiatives we've done with our clients and property managers. So we've done a couple of videos where we interview property managers that have experienced this firsthand. So the first one we did was with a company in Milan. Milan was the first sort of occidental market to be hit really, really, really hard. So it's interesting to hear this perspective from the revenue manager. So the person who actually had to deal with rates. These are tough times, and it's interesting to hear how others are living it as well. And we're not alone. Everyone is in the same context, basically, in the industry, or everyone is about to be. And yeah, maybe one last point, maybe or actually a couple last points on the opportunities ahead, right? What we'll see from the data is there are a number of markets in the world that are quite heavily dependent on their domestic market. What we think, and it's a general understanding in the industry, is that after being locked down for so many times at home, people will want to go out and travel. Travel always come back, and we think that the first travel type that will come back is the domestic one. And you can see, countries like the US with 90% of the demand that is local, or France 65%. China is 93%. So there's a lot of local demand for travelers that would probably look to nearby destinations to go out and take a break after all of these lockdown and social isolation, right? So there's an opportunity here. And another thing as well, we'll probably have to change the way we promote, our properties. So we're probably going to be able to offer properties after checkout, leaving a 2 or 3 days period to make sure that the inventory or the potential virus has died, because it's estimated to die after 24, 48 hours. And basically we'll have to adapt the way we promote our properties. So if you want, we're going to move from I think it was trendy to have green label on properties, eco-friendly green. And now we're probably going to move to a blue label where we're going to show that they are healthy and sanitized. And I'm sure Alex will be able to talk much better about that later. And finally, maybe one last point about more opportunities to come. We think that it's time to be creative. So whatever demand you can get, we saw in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, people were getting demand from local rescue workers that had to come and find an accommodation to rebuild the country. So they were able to save the season by accommodating people who came there. So there's always creative ways to get these extra bookings, or at least get this extra cash, because now we can't afford to not get it, right? So one of the other options is looking at midterm rental. So we've just made a compilation of some midterm rental platforms in here that may be helpful or not in your market. You can go and access it. And I think some of these are actually accessible through Guesty, so you can actually push your inventory there with no hassle, I believe. So yeah, that's a little bit what I wanted to present, Omer. I'm sure there's going to be questions, so I'm happy to take them after.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pierre, first of all, for all the information.
Thanks.
I want to try and get something positive out of you. So if I'm looking at the data here, which is kind of gloomy, and I'm a short-term rental property manager, I say I'm not the only one seeing all of those cancellations. It does seem, and I can actually attest from the Guesty point of view, that indeed we did not see a lot of inventory moved out of platforms or out of the PMC, but just very low occupancy. Domestic does seem to be the big hope for everybody, and a very immediate one. People are not going to be very quick to go on planes. They are going to be quick about getting in the car. And when they actually do some kind of vacation in their local market, they're actually very likely to go for a vacation home or a short-term rental and not a hotel necessarily. So it's all true. Do we see any signs of that already in markets that are slowly getting back to action? Japan, China, all the markets in which basically the market is already a month ahead of where the United States and Europe are today. Give me something,
Yes.
Pierre.
I'll give you something. So first good news is the books don't look too bad for, the summer. So some markets, they have really reliant on summer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And basically there, the books look pretty good. So they look solid. People haven't really canceled their plans. We don't know what is going on. So, make sure you talk to your guests in advance. And there's an opportunity there. And, we think travel will come back. Said that, right now, it's going to be hard for the whole world. And, we're in the front line. We need to be realistic. And, for the next few weeks, it's going to be tough. And, we need to prepare for that. And then on the rest of the markets, there has been some hotel demand pickup in China. Indubitably, there's already a bit of demand on the hotel demand. On the short-term rental demand, there hasn't been much because basically, the main OTAs have taken some decision to maintain, if you want, low the demand in this market. So we haven't really seen the picked up on short-term rental yet there. But we'll continue monitoring that, and as soon as we see something, the curve are already going down in Europe of infected persons. Hopefully, we can see some good news for the next few months to come. So we'll be tracking that, and all will be in the website.
Phenomenal. And yes, I can also attest that we see still the summer pretty much unhurt, and actually pretty strong numbers for the fall, which is very, very interesting because people who are staying at home thinking about their fall travel, which is interesting. And with that, actually, let's maybe move to Quinn at Wheelhouse, because if we're expecting a strong fall, we want to know how to price for that and how to price to all the time in the middle between now and the fall. Quinn, are you still with us?
Yes. Can you hear me, Omer?
We can. So Quinn,
All
you're
right.
joining us from San Francisco with Wheelhouse, part of the Lyric Group, one of the
Yes.
most prominent players in the yield management and price optimization space. Again, a partner of ours on the marketplace and working with a lot of our strategic customers at Guesty. Would love to hear what you guys are seeing.
No, but first off, thank you, Pierre. That's amazing data that you walked us through. I know our team's been playing around with the product that you built for this crisis, and it's some really cool, powerful data. So thank you for sharing that. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to spend about 10 minutes walking through basically the 3 questions that we've been getting the most the last few weeks. The first one is, how should folks be thinking about revenue management during a crisis that we've never really seen like this? What are some market signals that we're seeing on our end, and what are some things that Wheelhouse can do to ultimately help you? Okay, so the first up is going to be revenue management during a crisis. I mean, you all really don't need me to remind you of this, but we're in unprecedented times. I'm not the first that's told you that, nor will I be the last. And really, in truth, there's no playbook for something that is this uncertain and, as Omer's mentioned, changing so quickly every day. I'll do my best to give you our high-level advice for what to do in a time like this. But it's truly, again, as even Pierre has pointed out, it's truly on a case-by-case basis depending on where your properties are. We've got some silver linings. Not all of the slides are going to show how bad everything is. There are a few places that actually are seeing some promising things that I'll get through later. But it also really depends on what's important to you as a property manager, a PMC, an Airbnb host, a property owner, etc. Everyone's different, obviously, and I've spoken to a lot of our customers the last few weeks, and there's a lot of different approaches right now. Some are trying to power through and over-communicate with their guests to make sure the guests know exactly what they're getting into, how much the owners are going through to make sure they're actually cleaning their place and going through all of the recommended things to disinfect properties. Others have switched to long-term rentals right now. They're actually temporarily getting out of short-term rentals. Some folks have opted to completely shut down for the few months and are opting to still pay their cleaners and some of the people that rely on them for revenue, which is very noble. Obviously, not everyone can withstand zero revenue for the next few months. So ultimately, you need to figure out what's best for your situation, and Wheelhouse is here to help you as much as we possibly can. And again, I'll do my best to share kind of high-level advice on what to do from a revenue management perspective during these difficult times. But but if you ultimately want to discuss your particular situation, where your properties are, some things that are important to you, or what you're trying to optimize over this next few months, please reach out to us. I've got an email here, hello@usewheelhouse.com. You can also reach out to me, Quinn@usewheelhouse.com. We're here to help, and we're here to listen and do everything that we possibly can. The last point I want to make on this slide is obviously we don't know how long this is going to last. No one does, and it's going to be different in every market, as we'll see with some slides coming up. But ultimately, what I can recommend is just making sure that you're being reactive to your own needs in the short term, but also not selling yourself short and not making any rash decisions for your stay dates that are far into the future. So as much as you can protect those stay dates further on, we really just, no one knows what the demand is going to be once everything gets better. So make sure that you're not selling yourself short and you're actually protecting those stay dates is the best advice that I can give you there. Okay, so 2 main points on the market signals that I want to cover here. What is the data telling us on the macro level? I'm not going to show anything nearly as robust as Pierre walked us through a bit ago, but there's some things that we can show you, and then we're going to see what our customers have been saying the last few weeks. We've been reaching out to everyone. Maybe some of you are on the call right now just to see how they're handling the situation, and as you'll see, no two situations are alike. So the first up, there's 4 markets that we're going to be focusing on to see how the virus is actually manifesting in many different ways. We're going to be stepping through Omer's home, the greatest city in the world, New York City, the Catskills. I know he said he's in upstate New York. I don't know how far he is from the Catskills, but a nice little weekend
Close enough.
getaway from New York. We'll look at Rome, which is seeing very similar patterns to New York right now. And then some glimmer of hope, we'll look at the Big Island in Hawaii to see what's going on there. And again, I just want to reiterate that what we're seeing is really on the macro kind of market level. There's obviously a ton of nuance within these 4 markets and even all markets in general. So again, if you're seeing something differently and you're in one of these markets, or you want to know what we're seeing in your market, reach out to us and we can help you. So the first place to step through a little bit here is New York, which is currently the epicenter of the outbreak in the US. We're seeing something similar as the picture that Pierre pointed, but cancellations are way up. Occupancy's down about 70% for the month of April as of the data yesterday, even though rates for the next 30 days are actually lower than last year. And really the big takeaway here is, to the surprise of no one, I'm guessing, is that price is just not a factor in New York, or really any city that is at the epicenter of any of these outbreaks. What we're seeing is that it just doesn't matter how low you go with your price. Sorry if there's a siren in the background, if you can hear that. I don't know if y'all can hear that.
Stay safe, Quinn.
Luckily, I'm okay. Yeah, so as we're seeing in a lot of these urban areas, that no matter how low you go with your prices, you're not going to be drumming up any demand in these cities that are just on total lockdown. The silver lining is, though, for at least even New York, if you're looking at the occupancy around June, July, things do start to pick up. It remains to be seen if these are just folks that are optimistic and haven't canceled their travel yet, or what it is. It's a fluid situation. It'll continue to evolve, but we are starting to see some things over the summer start to have the tides turn, which is promising. On the other hand, the Catskills, again, weekend getaway. I think it's what Omer knows better, but probably about a 3-hour drive from the city. Right. Typically a big, as you can see in this chart for earlier in the year, it's a big weekend destination with this huge spikes between the weekend and weekday. An overall trend that we've been seeing in a lot of urban areas, especially as of late, and which supports our hypothesis that many folks in these dense urban areas are looking to hop in their cars and get away. We're seeing it in the Catskills and other upstate New York markets. We're seeing it in the Hamptons. I have friends in San Francisco that have left to go to Tahoe for a few weeks and wait this out. Although we're not quite seeing a similar pattern in Tahoe. I know once they actually shut down the ski resorts, we saw a lot more cancellations there. But the main point here is that there are still some markets outside of urban areas that are getting an uptick in demand. So for ADR in the Catskills, we're seeing a small uptick of about 15%, and occupancy at this point is about 2 to 3 times higher than it was last year. Rome, very similar booking trends to New York. Again, the big takeaway here, price is just not an effective lever. Again, not a huge surprise, but no matter how low right now you're going with your price for the next 30 days, it's just not driving more demand. But again, we're starting to see a little bit of that trend switch around summertime. So we're hopeful that, again, we'll see how this webinar actually, if any of our predictions come true, as Omer said, but things are looking promising later this summer. And lastly, the Big Island, an isolated island in the Pacific Ocean, which sounds pretty nice at a time like this. Doesn't sound like the worst place to escape. There's only 5 known cases of coronavirus as of this morning. And actually, we're seeing a slight dip in April. Otherwise, the Big Island is holding strong as it was last year. And in fact, occupancy's up a little bit from what it was last year. Prices are up a little bit. Is it just because the Big Island hasn't really been hit as much? Maybe, but there are some markets around the world that actually have been able to withstand what we're seeing. Okay, I know I'm already at the 10-minute mark, so I'm going to try to power through here. What have our customers been saying? So I can leave these up on the screen for a little bit. I don't need to go through all of them, but you'll see there's a lot of different theories of what's going on. I love one of these. I don't want to bring politics into this, but one of our customers is seeing different booking trends depending on how you vote, which is a silly hypothesis. Others, again, are switching to long-term rentals. I've got another slide here which has some good news here. They're advertising excellent cleaners, trying to just over-communicate with their guests. They haven't had that many cancellations. Their area also just doesn't have that many reports of the virus. But there are still some things that hosts and property managers can be doing to proactively, again, just try to show as much empathy as possible for guests, give them options, and again, hope for the best. Okay, so my last point here is what Wheelhouse can do for folks. So again, on this notion of being reactive in the short term and being proactive in the long term, we've got some features that just help basically lower your minimums and your minimum price depending on how far away someone's trying to book right now. So you can easily just be protecting those dates that are farther into the future, just so that when things do get better, you're not going to be selling yourself short for stay dates far into the future. You can quickly make date range overrides and adjustments to seasonality on the bulk level. So if you're someone that has a lot of properties in your portfolio, it's super easy to make these changes portfolio wide. We are here to help. I mean, we've been very impressed by the number of folks we've been talking to and just the amount of empathy that they've been showing to their guests. We're trying to do the same with all of our customers. We're here to help. We've got 24/7 customer support. So here, just a few product shots. Sorry, I'll power through here. This is just kind of what I was saying about the dynamic minimum price and minimum stays. We don't need to spend too much time here, and that you can just do a lot of these changes on a bulk level. And Omer, not to take your job away, but the key takeaways that I want everyone to get here is that, again, these are not easy times for anyone. I think anyone that's in the travel hospitality industry is feeling the crunch right now. And there really just is no silver bullet or playbook on what to do during these times. There's a lot of good resources. I know my other speakers on this webinar are going to be sharing a lot of good resources. Take advantage of everything that's out there. There's a lot of really smart people putting a lot of time into these resources, and now's the time to take advantage. My second point, there's this again, depending on where you are, it's just not a matter of price sensitivity. You can try to lower your prices, but as we're seeing, it's just not making a huge impact on demand at this time. Create a strategy that works for you and your location, adjust accordingly. We don't know how long this is going to last, obviously. Be prepared for the short and long-term market conditions, and email us for a free consultation. Things will get better. It's still early, but we're seeing upticks in some markets around the world. So make sure you're ready to capitalize once people are actually traveling again. And while I'm biased, and I obviously think that you should be using Wheelhouse, there are other options out there too for folks. I think demand-driven pricing right now in general is going to be as important as it's ever been. So I highly recommend everyone explore what's best for them.
Thank you so much, Quinn. And we're going to move quickly to the next panelist just to make sure that we have time for everything.
Yep,
really
sorry
appreciate
about
that. A lot of our hosts do ask, besides the pricing, how do I deal with the fact that I'm now actually at a position where I'm being asked a lot of questions that I don't know how to answer? Is your apartment sanitized? What do you do to actually make sure that it's clean and that there's no viruses in there? We get a whole lot of questions about that from our customers, and we push them right through to Alex at Properly, one of the, again, industry veterans who have a lot of information and a lot of thoughts about that. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Omo. Yeah, so after all this gloom and doom, I hope I can inject a little bit of optimism, or at least focus on solutions. So what I'm going to talk about is peace of mind. This is a time of fear and uncertainty. There's going to be several waves in this period I want to address on how do we deal with those waves, how do we ride the wave, but then most importantly, how do we restore peace of mind for guests, very, very importantly for owners, to convince them not to move their properties off of short-term rentals. And then lastly, and equally importantly, for cleaning professionals, because someone actually still has to clean our places. So with that, let me jump into the presentation. There is really, from our perspective, there's two parts to this. There is the immediate time, which is today, and that's all about substitution, and I'll get into what I mean by substitution in a second. And then there's the day after tomorrow, which is when we're going to be dealing with recovery. So let me suggest a couple of ideas of what the plan for each of those two periods is. So the substitution period is right now substitution because tourists don't come anymore. It's actually legal in many markets. Many markets have entered quarantine, meaning there's just no way, it doesn't matter how we change our prices, what we do, and people cannot stay at our short-term rentals. So we have to figure out who else can stay at our short-term rentals. What we're starting to hear from markets all around the world, that there is multiple interesting groups. The most obvious one is we have a set of countries that adopted different policies as in how to deal with this pandemic. Those countries that are focusing on contact tracing, and there's a good number of those, typically have a much higher number of people who have to enter self-isolation or quarantine than they actually have cases, luckily. Those people have to go somewhere. Like we see that very much in New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, all countries where they've introduced contact tracing. We are as an industry, we're in a perfect situation to actually afford or offer accommodation to people who have to go for 2 or 3 weeks into isolation, either because they have to or because they choose to. There's many use cases for people who choose to go into isolation. Imagine if you're in a multi-family or multi-generational household, you live with your grandparents, someone in the family is COVID-19 positive. Do you really want to expose your grandparents to the risk, or do you just rent yourself a flat for 2 or 3 weeks? Sort of those are isolation cases. Obviously quarantine and then local authorities that enforce quarantines is another big use case. What we're seeing is we've talked to a couple of people from FEMA recently. There is an interesting juxtaposition, like what do you use short-term rentals for and what do you use hotels for? What we're seeing in the US right now is hotels are being pressed into service as makeshift hospitals. But in terms of accommodating people who have to be in isolation or quarantine but are not sick, let's remember that 4/5 of people who are COVID-19 positive will not actually have any serious symptoms and don't need hospital care. Those people are much better off in private accommodation because they have to be isolated, they have to be self-contained, meaning they need a kitchen, they need a living room. So like our type of accommodation is actually much better for them. Other usage groups that we're seeing is there is obviously all the healthcare workers that are pushing into high density areas right now. The problem is much more severe in high density areas in the cities than it is in the outlying areas. So there's a big use case for people, for nurses, for doctors that either moving to the city for the short term so they can help out, or that want to stay close to the hospital because they don't want to go in between the 2 shifts that they're doing. They don't want to go home and the risk of infecting their family or travel fairly far away. So there's a big opportunity there. So that's the first wave. The second wave is recovery. I think a number of the other two, Pierre and Quinn, have already alluded to that. The recovery, I think, no one knows how long exactly it's going to take. I think what's going to be interesting is the substitution wave and the recovery wave. They automatically come one after the other. So as long as we can play both, we should be able to adjust to that. The recovery wave we expect from everything we're hearing from our customers is going to be much more pronounced initially in the drive-to markets as people push out of the cities. So there's actually a couple of interesting dynamics that we're hearing from early markets, from Italy in particular. Obviously, if you've been in quarantine, if you've been in self-isolation for a period of time, you want to get out of there. But even better from an opportunity perspective, or sort of more promising, is the fact that the two things that hold people in the cities today is the kids go to school there and the parents have a job that they have to go to every day. Both of those things looks like are not going to be constraints for the foreseeable future, for the next few months, as there's a big push for people to work from home. And of course, schools are being closed around the world. So it allows people to go away for a week or for 2 or for 3, rent a house in the country, stay by themselves. So those are the sort of two big drivers that we hear around the world and that we see. And sort of we see market by market, depending on what market it is, what the timing of those is, we'll have to see. Let me jump into what do we do about it. Of course, as we are able to accommodate these guests, again, there's really 3 things we need to have in place as part of our plan to let guests, owners, and cleaning professionals feel safe again, have peace of mind. The first one is, what do we do? That's the checklist. What are the best demonstrated best practices that we can employ to keep our properties disinfected and clean? The second part of this plan is traceability and compliance. We have to make sure that everybody knows what's been done. When has a place been cleaned? Who has it been cleaned to? And exactly what has been done? Has every light switch been wiped down? Has every kitchen surface been disinfected properly? What cleaning supplies have been used? And then the third part of this story is the communication and transparency. We have to have a platform where everybody sees what's happening. The stakeholders are many. That's obviously you'll see a lot of interest from the listing platforms, from the Airbnbs of the world and the Booking.coms and the Expedia Verbos of the world, about making sure the properties are safely disinfected. There's other stakeholders. There's obviously the guest. How do we make sure that the guest has access to information of who cleaned the property and when, and how do they get peace of mind that this is safe? There's potentially local entities, local health authorities that you'll see very shortly, impose regulation around what's safe and what's not, particularly as our type of industry, the short-term rentals, are going to be measured by the same standards as hotels. So there's a very important component of making sure how do we tie all these pieces together. So let me talk about each of them a little bit. The first question is, what do we do? What's the best practice? For us, it has 4 components. First question is, what are compliant cleaning processes? There's WHO guidelines. Then, of course, each country has their own. In the US, we have CDC and EPA guidelines. EPA guidelines on what cleaning products to use and what cleaning products are approved, and CDC guidelines on what the right processes are. We have all of those included in our entire system, so they all automatically have been pushed to the checklist library. The more that our industry can actually start using these processes, but more importantly, vouch that we're using those processes, make sure and enforce that everybody's using those processes, the better as an industry can guarantee and certify the safety of our guests. Second component is approved products. So both what products have been approved for disinfection, how do we use them safely? There's guidelines about, sort of for disinfection materials, how long do they have to be on the surface to actually guarantee that the surface has been disinfected. There's alternative solutions now, cleaning products that can prevent reinfection for up to 24 hours. There's the whole important story of cleaner safety. How do we make sure that the cleaners have peace of mind so they actually continue to do the job? But also, how do we as their employers safeguard them so nothing happens to them? Because we have not just moral responsibility, but also legal responsibility towards them. How do we make sure that they follow best practices? How do we make sure that they know what to do? And then there's the question of what additional supplies do we equip our properties with as guests are expecting different levels of sanitation, like they're expecting sanitizers and a different level of sanitation at our properties. So that's the what to do. And in Properly, what we're doing is we've compiled best practices from all around the world. And we obviously have compliant checklists for all the different use cases that we've pushed into our checklist library. Second thing is, how do we actually do it? So that's the compliance part. On the compliance side, we need to make sure that we have a framework where each of the key stakeholders knows who did what and when. So who is, has the cleaner been verified? Have they used best practices? Have they been trained on how to disinfect the surface? And in our case, since many of you will not be able to train them because you actually can't put everybody into a room together anymore, you have to do it remotely, meaning we have all of the, in our app, we have all of the opportunities to basically run them through specific best practices and standard operating procedures. Second thing is, when has something been done? When was a property disinfected? When did someone stay there last? You need a compliance platform for that, like the job, on what date and time was it done. We obviously have a location stamp, so we can prove that to all of the interested entities, be it a local health authority or anybody who's in that loop. What was done, specifically what has been done, have light switches been disinfected, have pull cords for fans been disinfected, have kitchen surfaces been disinfected, have screens been wiped. We have to be able to prove all of that. And then lastly, we also have our inspection component that's very cost effective in terms of, can you actually ensure that a third party has certified everything, which is what we do. The last part is we have to communicate all of that, and I think I have 30 seconds left, so I'll finish very quickly. In terms of communication, we have to make sure that each of the 6 stakeholders in this equation know what happened. That's the guests, that's the owners, that's the cleaning professionals, that's obviously local health entities, property managers, and the listing platforms. So that's kind of wraps it up for us. I'm an optimist by nature. I think there is, in the short term, our industry is going through a really difficult time, but there's also a huge opportunity ahead. So I think if all of us prepare properly, like there's lots of opportunities, we have lots of resources for you, and we have tons of empathy for our customers. We want to help you get through this. And of course, we're not going to charge for anything until you, our customers, make money again. Like that's the least we can do. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Alex. We are left with just a few minutes for questions, so feel free to send them through our Q&A. I'm gonna ask some questions to all our guests here in the audience. I actually want to start with you, Alex. One of the questions that came in when you spoke, sorry to surprise you there, was, given the situation, asking Martha, should I leave a day in between guests just for disinfection and cleaning? Is that something that you recommend doing, given the sensitivity of the situation?
Yes, I mean, it really depends on the market and depends on the situation. Sort of, let me go from most extreme to most lenient. In the most extreme cases, if you have been hosting patients at your property with known cases of COVID-19, probably the best practice is to leave 72 hours hold in between one guest and the next guest. We've been discussing that with the booking platforms, with the listing platforms. They're thinking along similar lines. I don't think there's an official position yet, but we'd strongly recommend it. And then it really depends on the market and on the opportunity. I think best practice sort of right now as we're approaching the peak in many countries, and in particular if you're hosting people like that are known to be COVID-19 positive, is a 72-hour hold in between stays.
Next question was actually directed at us at Guesty. Lisa was asking, do we see any specific trends in the market in the last few weeks? Are there any parts of the market that are actually still active? I think we talked about it a little bit, but just to give more information, the drive-by destination, as Quinn actually shared, the only market that we actually see specific growth year over year, so 2020 April has more than April 2019, are basically upstate New York, Napa Valley, Sonoma Valley, all the areas outside of San Francisco. Tahoe was there, but now it's shut down to residents only, so it's a little bit of a different situation. And south of LA, a lot of people apparently love to spend this time in Joshua Tree, so that's great. Those are basically the drive-by destinations. They are also seeing more reservations now for August and September. Specifically, there is a new category that we call the city escapers. Those are the young families, think, 2 adults and 2 kids, usually in a small apartment in New York. Everybody is home all the time. They would love to swap that for something in the countryside. And so this is really a better hour for the suburban and rural markets. Another point that is worth mentioning is that the mountain area time, Boulders, Colorado, other areas around there have been dropping significantly less than urban markets. And so drive-by destinations outside of big cities and the mountain region, this is something that we are seeing reacting very differently in this time. Quinn, next one is for you from Joe Vasallo on the chat here. And he wants to know, is yield management solution even effective at time of such unprecedented crisis? It's all about bringing the data, looking at historical data. Can that even still be effective when we're dealing with such an unknown situation?
I mean, again, I think it's going to be really hard to make any sort of sweeping answers to that. I think in most places right now, no. I mean, I think that price just is not a huge factor in driving demand right now. I think where yield management can really come into play is once this is over and we see this flood of demand. I know, like, cooped up in my little studio apartment, I can't wait to get out and travel as much as I possibly can once it's safe to. I can't speak for everyone, but I think that yield management is going to be very, very important as ever once this is actually over. But again, I think like we're just not seeing price being a lever that's actually able to drive up demand right now.
So it's a get ready for the day after. Thank you, Quinn. We have time for about 2 or 3 more questions, so keep them coming. A very interesting question for you, Pierre, from Sasha on our chat. Is there enough data to speculate the effect of increased unemployment on the demand or pricing over the long term? In other words, yes, we know that people will finish this period of time and want to travel. Can we estimate if they'll be able to travel and what will be the impact of any kind of global financial crisis on travel patterns?
Yeah, that's a very, it's a complex question. We've seen a few reports. There's been reports on how this is going to impact GDP, and it's a little bit all over the place. The definition of the crisis is that everything is very volatile, and that includes as well estimates, right? So there are everything from scenarios where there is no travel for 9 months, even more, and then there are scenarios where it's just going to be a couple months, and maybe then it's going to start going, like we can start to see a little bit in Asia, right? What I'd say is that it goes by waves. So Omar, you mentioned a few markets that are that are still open and that are driving city travelers trying to escape. We also need to be mindful that this is how the virus spread in the first place, right? So the government, once they make decision, they're just going to look at that and say, okay, we're going to shut down the country. And we've seen that in Europe. We're in shutdown mode already, and hopefully we're in the process of getting less and less infected. When that impacts other markets like in Latin America or in North America, this might affect also these markets where it seems to be demand. It cannot just be canceled. Like Florida has just been canceled. So we need to prepare and be mindful that there is a few weeks ahead that are going to be really complicated for demand. And unfortunately, now we don't really know how it's going to affect unemployment, because it's not just us; it's all the industry. So we'll keep an eye on how things keeps getting resolved in countries that are a little bit ahead. But I would say, as a general advice for everyone, be ready for these complicated days.
Another general question that we got, and we're going to go on, everybody, with questions for another 5 or 10 minutes because I see there's a lot of them coming. And of course, we're also going to have that video distributed after on email for those of you who need to leave. Is there a noticeable difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 urban US markets in terms of bookings and cancellations? I can take a first stab, and I'd love Pierre, Quinn, Alex, for you to chime in if you have any information on your end. We have seen that specific markets have been slow to react, New York and Florida at the beginning, but then kind of like reacted very quickly and very drastically over the last week. Florida is a great example. I was myself there 3 weeks ago. It was business as usual, but at once it sort of shut. Right now, I would say that we are seeing an impact on all Tier 1 and Tier 2. Urban markets kind of feel like one big layer in the United States, and it's a stay-put market. The only exception is actually drive-by to suburban and rural. Pierre, Quinn, do you see anything different from your data?
Look,
take that as a no, Pierre?
I'll take that one. So basically, I mean, the first thing you can do is basically I didn't show you, but on the page, if you scroll down, you have a market by market analysis of cancellation. So you can set up a date and see how high the ratio of cancellation is. So you can really see, I think it's a mix of how impacted the city is and what's the regulation. So I was seeing a comment from Haiti here, I was commenting in Lake Tahoe, and basically the government decided to shut down short-term rentals so to limit the impact of people coming abroad and impacting the locals. So it really is a mix of the exposure and then the reaction of the governments attached to what is the perception that people have of that market, and if it's a typical market that you got to fly to, there is no flight now and people are not going to fly. So obviously it's going to change a lot. All of you, what we can see in the market by market basis, that's why we've made a small chart where we try to put like a sample of 200, so at least you get an idea of where things stand.
Thank you, Pierre. Alex, the next one is for you, and it's actually a very interesting question that Adam is asking. Let's say that we're leveraging all the great tips that you have. Is this something that we should put in our marketing, or is it completely insensitive to put now in the title a clean apartment or virus discount? By the way, I would go against virus discount, Adam. But for example, clean apartment or something along this line. Is this something that you just want to assume as a given, or you want to have that as part of your marketing and a clear messaging that you put out there right now?
So our recommendation, and we're seeing very, very, very early responses to that, is to make it explicit. Now, there's different ways to make it explicit. I would not call it a COVID-19 inspected property because that's too in your face. But what we are doing is we're providing templates for property managers and for hosts so they can actually specifically draw attention to the fact that they have special cleaning procedures in place. We typically recommend to put that into the listing description. So people will first look at a listing that they like, and then into the description, you can very easily open with a sentence or two on what special processes you go through right now. Another thing that we do, which is actually an interesting one, is we strongly encourage customers, and we're seeing several successful experiments, and it's super, super early, but on that, which is increase your cleaning fees. Because of course you're going to do a very different type of cleaning, and then pass a special charge on to the guest. That's actually, we believe that if anything, it actually encourages demand, because the same way that everybody expected after September 11th, after 9/11, everybody expected a security fee. People expect that there's additional costs and obviously more inspection. So if anything, you actually can increase those fees and give your guest peace of mind in the as a result. So in summary, absolutely, I would draw attention to it. I would speak to it. How you speak to it depends on the type of guest and what market you is. If you're in Milan, probably you do want to open with COVID-19 safety. If you're in Tahoe, you can do it in a more subtle way, but I would still very much speak to it.
Yeah, by the way, Alex, sorry, Omar, just to bounce back on that one, I think we'll take you on that one, and we'll make an analysis. If you want, we can do that together, Alex. We'll track how cleaning fees trends are trending for the next few months. Let's make an analysis on this together and publish something if that makes sense.
Absolutely, I would love to do that. And sort of again, I think we all have to raise our standards drastically. And this is one thing that guests are not going to complain about in terms of pricing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Count us in as well. But no, absolutely, totally agree with that. By the way, I see a few questions about specific markets like Miami and Tahoe. We will not address specific urban markets right now, but I encourage you to talk with us, with Pierre, with Quinn, with all the people on the call that are actually having this data and would love to share that with you. For those who ask if this will be recorded, it is recorded and we'll share it in a few days over email. Let's go to another specific question for you, Quinn. Daniel wants to know, as a dynamic pricing tool, did you change your model and the factors that you take into account? So for example, things like day of the week and seasonability that are less actually effective right now. Did you change any of those to other factors given the unique times that we're all living through?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the normal factors that we're looking at every night to inform our pricing. So booking curves, occupancy, ADR, all that's being drastically impacted right now, which ultimately feeds back into the pricing engine. But again, I think right now, it doesn't matter how low a pricing engine or recommendation tells you to go. There's just a lot of places that no matter how low you actually put your rates, you can't artificially drive up bookings if people aren't allowed to travel. So in short, like, yes, we're seeing it and our pricing engine is reacting to it. But this is just unprecedented times, and lowering your price doesn't mean you're automatically going to get more bookings, unfortunately.
Fair enough. And I'm going to try once again to push you all to join me in a high note. So I want to know, Pierre, one of the questions that we're seeing here all the time is there any precedent to these unprecedented times? Meaning, can we look at the data of, how the hotel industry recovered from 2008 or from another financial crisis to try and understand how much time does it take for the travel industry to bounce back? Is there any data signs that we can hold and latch onto to try and understand where it's going to be back to normal for our industry?
Yeah, can I share maybe really quickly? Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Or maybe I can share in the chat an article I've got here. Does that work? Yes. All right. So basically, there's an article here that I think is interesting. Obviously, short-term rental back 15 years ago didn't really have, we didn't have the technology to track what we can track now. But basically, if you see this article about the SARS outbreak in China, you can see how there's basically a V-shaped impact on the hotel occupancy. So, we have some precedent from that, and you can see how it dropped and, get back slowly in different markets. And this is sort of a sign of hope. Right now we're somewhere here. You got to expect a few more weeks. It may be a little bit longer, but there is precedent for an outbreak. And there's also precedent for catastrophes. There's been, the Maria hurricane, for instance, in Puerto Rico, I was mentioning earlier. There's been political uncertainties in Hong Kong that completely killed the market last year. And basically, we've seen that happen at these scales, never. And what I think is new is that this is going to be having impact on the economy. I think the question before was very interesting because this is where we're going to, have to wait and see, and how big this really is.
Thank you, Pierre. And now I do want to be a little bit still mindful of time. So I want to thank everybody. I know there's a lot more questions. In fact, 38 more questions in the queue. But again, let's be cognizant of time. And I know everybody on the line would love, everybody here would love to answer your questions if you guys email us directly. A little personal note at the end. I know those are hard times, but it's amazing to see how the industry comes together and how quickly and agile the short-term rental industry have been compared to other markets by understanding this whole use case of city escapers, adjusting pricing, adjusting length of stay. I think that the agility of our category is going to serve all of us very well. And like Pierre said, at the time, we are all projecting very nice fall ahead in terms of occupancy rates and pricing. So I think this is definitely something to latch onto. Again, on behalf of 300 employees at Guesty, we're always here for you. We'd love to hear how you guys are going through those times, assist when we can, connect you to other partners of ours or other customers that have seen good results to some of the measures they are taking. We're always here for you, and we are gonna win through this together as an industry. Alex, Quinn, Pierre, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, stay clean, stay healthy. Thank you for all of you for joining us and for those who are watching us later on the video. And again, hoping for better times for all of us.
Thanks so much, Omar, Abby, and everyone else. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Omar.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.